I truly, truly love that girl.
What is it that torments you the most right now?
What Audrey went through in the murder keeps me awake at night.
Those were the choking words of a father. Simple words, but filled with a pain that no words can describe. Because perhaps nothing can break a heart more than losing a child that you once cherished, loved, and placed all your hopes in the future ahead. The story begins on a normal evening like any other in a small town called Arena, located along a peaceful river in Australia. There, everyone knows each other, winding roads lead through vast fields, and the atmosphere is always quiet and peaceful. But sometimes it is in that peace that the most unpredictable things are hidden. Audrey Griffin, a 19-year-old girl, is dynamic and full of determination. She is not only the pride of her family, but also a bright light in the eyes of her friends. Audrey is passionate about sports, has competed in international triathlons, and above all, she has been accepted into the Navy to begin her journey to serve her country. Before embarking on a new chapter in her life, Audrey decided to return to her hometown to spend some quality time with her family and friends, the people she loved the most. That night was a warm farewell party, laughter, hugs, and wishes of good luck. No one knew that it would be the last time they would see that radiant smile. The peaceful atmosphere was quickly torn apart by something that no one could explain. That night, what really happened? On March 21st, 2025, the sunset fell over the small town of Arena as usual, signaling the end of a peaceful day. For Audrey Griffin, it was a special day. She had just spent time visiting her grandfather in the hospital, then met up with a group of close friends at a nearby bar to hold a farewell party before she officially left to join the Navy. None of them could have expected that the laughter that echoed that night would soon be replaced by tears that could never be wiped away. That night, the atmosphere in Arena carried a familiar stillness, but there was also something unusual that no one noticed. Around 2 a.m., after saying goodbye to her friends, Audrey walked out of the bar. She opened the taxi hailing app but couldn't connect to any. Instead of waiting in vain, Audrey decided to walk along the deserted road herself, heading towards her father's house just a few kilometers away. Her footsteps echoed quietly on the damp ground, illuminated only by the sparse streetlights. There were no obvious signs of danger. Everything seemed so normal that no one was alert. But in the middle of that night, someone else was also moving. A figure, silently, a few hundred meters away, following her every step. On some surveillance cameras on the side of the road, people later saw clearly Audrey walking, her eyes still full of determination and calm. Behind her, a strange man briefly appeared in the frame, looking furtive and uneasy. But at that time, no one paid attention to that detail. No one warned her. No one knew that danger was approaching. The time between 2:15 and 3 a.m. was a hazy void. There were only a few scattered clues. A resident near the river reported hearing a piercing scream in the night, a sound they initially thought was just the cry of a wild animal. Another, while walking his dog, felt uneasy when he passed a man with an unusual expression, his face tense, his demeanor uncertain. The signs at that moment were too vague for anyone to connect into a clear premonition. Audrey had no idea she was being followed. No one realized that the familiar path would become her last. And then all traces fell silent. The sky remained dark, the river still flowed, but something terrible had happened in that darkness. Something that would shock the entire country as the truth gradually emerged. On the morning of March 22, 2025, the first rays of sunlight began to filter through the trees of the town of Arena. Everything was going as usual, until a mother woke up with an indescribable feeling weighing on her heart. Having not heard from her daughter since the party last night, she opened the app to track Audrey Griffin's phone, a small habit that gave her peace of mind whenever her daughter was out late. But the screen popped up and her heart sank. The green dot, the symbol of Audrey's location, was still standing motionless. near a deserted stretch of river, far from the house where she was supposed to return. She tried calling. No one answered. Messages went unanswered. In a panic, she immediately contacted Audrey's father, who was in Arena. His answer only added to her worries. Audrey had never been home. Maybe she had stayed at a friend's house? They quickly called to verify, but no one had seen her since the party. At this point, everyone began to realize that something was seriously wrong. A group of friends and family rushed out into the street, following the last location of the phone they could determine. The destination was a quiet stretch of riverbank that no one thought could be related to the young girl. They walked in silence, their eyes scanning the grass, hoping for the smallest glimmer of hope. Then they saw it, a handbag. Next, a familiar hair clip that Audrey often wore. The father's heart stopped as he bent down to pick up the items. No one needed to say anything. Fear quietly filled the air. The emergency call was made immediately. The 000 call center received the call, and the police quickly arrived at the scene. The atmosphere was heavy and tense. Everyone stood still on the riverbank, where the water flowed slowly, carrying invisible hauntings. The rescue team began to scan the area. And then, one of the police officers spotted a strange object floating on the water. As they got closer, the truth became undeniable. It was a human body. The crowd standing on the shore immediately broke into sobs. The father collapsed, his hands shaking, without needing to look closely to know that it was his daughter. Audrey was pulled to the shore in a suffocating silence. No one spoke. The police quickly sealed off the scene, but the desperate eyes knew that, from this moment on, things would never be the same again. Last night, something terrible had happened, and this morning, a family's world was torn apart forever. The riverbank where Audrey Griffin's body was found seemed to bear little in the way of obvious clues. The ground was muddy, footprints were mixed in with the weeds, and only a few scattered personal belongings remained. A handbag, a hair clip, and a phone partially buried in the wet mud. Everything seemed simple, as if an unfortunate accident had happened in the dark of night. But her loved ones, from the very first moment, sensed that something was wrong. The forensic team quickly moved in, starting the process of examining the scene and the body. While the riverbank was cordoned off to search for any further evidence, Audrey's body was carefully examined. Initial results indicated that she had died of drowning, but that was only the tip of the iceberg. It didn't take long for experts to notice a series of unexplained marks. On Audrey's arms, there were long scratches that suggested she had struggled or been dragged. Her face also bore light scratches, enough to suggest a struggle or scuffle before she lost consciousness. But what caught the investigators' attention the most were the tiny marks under her fingernails, skin samples that didn't belong to Audrey. No cameras recorded those final moments, but the details of the girl's body spoke for themselves in the silence of the scene. Forensic doctors concluded that the time of death occurred shortly after Audrey left the bar. That confirmed the gap between 2 a.m. and 3 a.m. as the most important link. The unexpected clue came from the coat Audrey wore that night. It was torn at the shoulders and sleeves, not consistent with a simple accident. Coupled with the analysis of the fingernails, the investigation team was forced to confront the possibility that this was not an accidental death, but the marks of a deliberate attack. The initial silence was gradually replaced by a barrage of questions. Another story, darker and more complex, began to unfold. At first, Audrey Griffin's death was considered a tragic accident, but her family's strong premonition and unusual clues forced the police to reopen the case. A full investigation began, quietly but fiercely, under pressure not only from the victim's family, but also from the local community, whose peace had been shattered by an unforeseen tragedy. The first clues came from the footage extracted from the camera system along the path Audrey had walked that night. The image was not clear, but enough to recognize the silhouette of a strange man walking a few hundred meters away, following her every step. The investigators patiently reviewed each frame, each street, until they clearly identified. The person had continuously appeared on at least 3 different cameras, always keeping a distance, but not taking his eyes off the young girl. They did not stop there, but went to the people living near the area where the incident occurred. One witness recalled that at around 3 a.m., he heard a high-pitched scream coming from the riverbank. At that time, he thought it was the cry of a wild animal and did not pay much attention. Another person, a man walking his dog at night, also recounted that he felt uneasy when he accidentally passed by a man who looked restless and anxious. This detail, which initially seemed insignificant, now became an important link in the process of solving the case. All the testimonies pointed in the same direction: the presence of an unidentified man at a key time and place. Police immediately expanded their search for the suspect's identity and sent a DNA sample taken from under Audrey's fingernails for analysis. Soon the results returned a new twist. The DNA matched Adrian Torin, a 53-year-old man with a history of violence and repeated run-ins with the law. But an identity wasn't enough. Police needed more evidence to ensure their case would stand up in court. They continued to review other surveillance cameras, tracing the suspect's movements on the fateful night. It became clear Adrian Torin had followed Audrey almost the entire way she walked home. With enough evidence, police arrested Torin in Sydney. It was a gloomy morning. The man was handcuffed and escorted to the police station in silence. Investigators immediately began questioning him. Initially, Torin denied any involvement. He claimed he did not know Audrey and was not present at the scene. But every little detail in his testimony gradually became inconsistent when compared with the evidence. When asked about the time between 2 and 3 a.m., the gap the police were targeting, Torin faltered and could not provide a reasonable explanation. The psychological pressure began to wear on his patience. Using a skillful interrogation tactic, the investigators kept asking key questions, gradually removing his defenses. When he learned that his DNA had been found under the victim's fingernails, Torin fell silent. Although he did not admit it directly, his bewildered eyes and panicked expression somewhat confirmed the suspicions. While waiting for an official confession, the police accidentally collected an undeniable piece of evidence. In a monitored phone call before his arrest, Torin accidentally admitted that there was something inside him that made him lose control of himself. That was the final piece needed to close the crime scene. The case was then fully consolidated with forensic records, witness statements, and camera footage. The investigation, from the initial suspicions to the moment the suspect was handcuffed, was a testament to the perseverance and tireless efforts of the authorities. However, the case did not end there, because the biggest question, why, remained unanswered, and justice, even if served, could not ease the pain that the victim's family would have to endure for the rest of their lives. The trial for Audrey Griffin's death never happened. The justice that her family in Australia had been waiting for never came, because suspect Adrian Torin was never held accountable for his actions. Just 3 days after his arrest, Torin was found unconscious in his cell and died despite emergency treatment. Officially, it was his own fault. The sudden death not only added to Audrey's family's grief, it also crushed any hope of finding answers. There was no trial, no testimony, no chance for relatives to stand trial to seek justice for the young woman. There was widespread outrage that a man with a history of violence, who had been accused of threats, had been allowed to go free and had so easily taken the life of an innocent person. Torin's death sparked a wave of calls for change. Audrey's family, in their grief, still spoke out to demand stricter legal measures to protect women from violence and dangerous criminals. A resolution in her name was introduced in Congress. At the river where Audrey was found, hundreds of people threw flowers into the water in a quiet memorial. Audrey's mother choked up, saying, "We didn't get justice, but she will never be forgotten." The passing of Audrey Griffin was not only an irreparable loss for her family, but also a deep cut in the heart of an entire community. A young girl, full of passion, full of ambition, was unable to complete her life's journey because of the indifference and laxity of a system that had the chance to prevent this crime early. That pain is still there, quiet but persistent. Every parent, every friend, every citizen has the right to ask, what can we do differently to prevent tragedies like this from happening again? Audrey's case not only ended with a verdict, but also opened a broader wake-up call. that safety cannot be taken for granted, that every act of violence, no matter how small or fleeting, if ignored, can lead to irreversible consequences, and that justice should not be an afterthought, but a wall that protects the innocent from the start. It is also a time for each of us to reflect. Has society done enough to protect the vulnerable? Are the laws strict enough to stop repeat offenders? And most importantly, are we brave enough to speak up when we see even the smallest signs of danger? What do you think? What needs to change so that stories like Audrey's will forever be in our memories?